Hello, my name is Courtney Munroe with IDC. I'm in the telecommunications group, the worldwide telecommunications group, and I look at service provider strategies and how telecommunications carriers are adapting to the new realities and the new demands for both consumers and enterprises. So in today's session, I'll take a look at the emerging 5G ecosystem and what some of the developments we're seeing in terms of use cases for 5G, and what are some of the opportunities as well as some of the challenges for service providers over the next few years. But before I really get into a discussion of 5G, I think we need to step back and look at what are some of the key drivers for the overall IT ecosystem. I think, of course, over the last few years, digital transformation has been, first and foremost, a key issue for enterprises as well as IT vendors and service providers. And while most companies are well on their way to or begun that digital transformation journey, we're still in the midst of that cycle. And as the industry evolves, the emphasis on various aspects of digital transformation is evolving. I think the next phase of digital transformation, I believe, will be what I call for telcos, operational transformation. And as part of that, I think transformation for telcos started with, implementing a virtualized infrastructure, and it's evolving now to implementing and evolving to a cloud native operational infrastructure. So as telcos move to meet this, they're really looking to meet the demands from end users for cloud applications and for enterprises for distributed cloud-based architecture. The end game is really about providing an optimal customer experience, an optimal networking experience. And I think that is true for all enterprises across the spectrum. What do I mean by that? I think that if you look at digital transformation spending, IDC sees customer engagement and customer experience as, will consist of the majority of spending around digital transformation over the next 5 years. And the same is true for telcos. So how do you meet customers where they want to transact with you, whether it's on the web, whether it's by voice, whether it's on a messaging channel? I think personalization and providing that delightful experience to end users will be a key spending priority for telcos over the next 5 years. And to do that, I think telcos have to automate. They have to put in AI to do predictive analysis to understand not only how their network is performing, but what their customers are doing in that network, and how can they sort of anticipate some of the new services that their customers will be demanding over the next 5 years. I think the other key IT strategy we're seeing that's impacting telcos is, the transformation of the edge and the transformation of into a hybrid, public-private cloud infrastructure. I think this is important because there's many applications that are evolving that really need for the most optimal performance, high performance and low latency performance. And that's where the edge comes into play. That's where optimizing on a private cloud versus a public cloud comes into existence. That's where automating across public and private to provide, I think, the most cost-effective and the most optimized performance is important. And then I think the other key thing I want to mention is what we call at IDC data in motion. So we're seeing the creation of data is exploding and it's growing at about a 25% per year. And a lot of that data is being created on the edge of the network, but it's not necessarily transported to the core of the network. So the edge becomes important because you need an intelligent network that can analyze the data that you need on the edge, and you can either discard that data or you can transport it in the cloud. So a hybrid cloud is supremely important. And then you have 5G, right? This emerging new standard for mobile communications. And telcos are in the still early stages of implementing 5G. There's an uneven distribution on a worldwide basis. Some countries in Asia, South Korea, China, Japan, have begun well along the road to that implementation of 5G. In the Americas too, as well. But in many countries, operators are still, assessing and implementing spectrum for 5G. I mean, that's true in the US, it's true in Brazil, it's true in Mexico, as well as other companies. And I think over the next 5 years, we'll see, as companies acquire that spectrum, we'll see the true and diverse range of 5G services emerge. And IDC is predicting that as spectrum becomes acquired and implemented, we're going to see really rapid growth of 5G. We're projecting over the next 5 years, by 2025, 4.4 billion subscribers over the 5G infrastructure. That means you're going to have a 90% growth rate over the next 5 years. As you can see, that's a real rapid implementation. So there's considerable funds being spent on CapEx for 5G, CapEx for spectrum. And the next challenge will be, how do you monetize 5G? And how do you establish new revenue streams that will allow you to see an ROI on that investment? I think, keep in mind, 4G and in some areas 3G is still going to be in existence as parallel networks over the next several years alongside 5G, as 5G continues to grow significantly. So I think there's going to be substantial pressure on operators to have users migrate to 5G. So while 5G is great for efficiency on an operator side, there's going to be a challenge to monetize that implementation. So what we've seen is a lot of work has been done to create new use cases for 5G. And we believe that 5G will be implemented primarily on the enterprise side. It will be monetized primarily on the enterprise side. I mean, the consumer side will have 5G for access, but we believe most of the opportunities, most of the great profits is going to occur on the enterprise side. So what are these emerging use cases? And as you can see, what I'll do is talk a little bit on the next slide about some key implementations that we've seen and some of the key implementations that I expect to see over the next few years. So I must say that one of the key trends we expect to see is 5G being implemented primarily along vertical use cases and by specific industry use cases as well. So while the network is implemented horizontally to be monetized effectively, companies are going to have to establish very industry specific go-to-market strategies. And I think some of those strategies that we're seeing emerging are private networks. And by private networks, what we mean here is, an enterprise implementing a private network separate from the public network. And it doesn't have to be 5G. Typically, the typical implementation we see involves Wi-Fi. It could involve 4G LTE, and then also involve 5G, where there's the need for high performance, low latency, and real reliable traffic situations. But we've also seen, several greenfield 5G first use cases being implemented. And one example that I picked is a Verizon contract, which they won in the United Kingdom, in I believe it's in the southeast, in the port of Southampton. So the port of Southampton is a very strategic port for importing automobiles. I think they do about a million cars a year. So they're averaging about close to 100,000 cars that are imported in that port every year. So 5G, the efficiencies, the latency of 5G is great for that volume to be able to scale at that level. So they use it for asset tracking, for tracking the containers and the various cars that are in those containers on the port, and for doing real-time analytics of that data. And the other key use for that, for 5G, is that port is used for cruise ships. And so they handle millions of passengers every year through that port. So it's used for internet access for the consumers as well. So as you can see, the advantage here is 5G provides the scale and that reliability and that the latency for high volume usage. And I talked about the edge earlier, and I think one of the earliest use cases we saw is for edge computing capabilities. And a key example of this is Amazon AWS wavelength service, which has been implemented by several operators around the world. It started primarily in North America, but it's now implemented in Europe as well as the Asia Pacific region. And basically what this is customers of Amazon's E3C service, their storage and compute service, can leverage service provider 5G infrastructure for transporting high volume data across the network. So a key example we've seen is, for example, in healthcare, where doctors can transmit images in real time, for example, during a surgery, across over the network and to a cloud computer for analytics, and have that sent back in real time. And I think that's where you see that immense capability of 5G in terms of low latency performance is very important. So that's one example for where we see edge computing being tremendously important. Another big opportunity for emerging for 5G is in smart cities. And for example, one example is the city of Kelowna. I hope I pronounced it correctly, in Canada, and they use 5G to monitor both pedestrian and vehicles at major intersections. So they collect high volume data, and then they analyze that data for the traffic flows to redesign and to make those intersections safe. And there's other use cases for that as well, right? There's use cases for security, for tracking purposes, et cetera. So I think this is just one example that we've seen from a smart city perspective. Another key and very, very important industry is some call it industry 4.0, some call it a factory of the future, And I think there's some early implementation that we've seen. One is a really interesting one I've seen is in Orange in France. I think it's in Normandy, where Orange in partnership with Schneider Electric, they have implemented 5G at one of the Schneider factories. And what they've done is used it for augmented reality so that technicians can inspect equipment, using a mobile phone and using sort of 3D augmented reality to sort of inspect equipment. And then they also use it, for factory robots with video cameras, so that those robots can move around the factory, and you can remotely control them and remotely inspect equipment and other processes in the factory. And to do that, you need significant, multi-gigabit capability. And I think that's where the 5G, infrastructure makes a lot of sense. So those are some examples and use cases that have been, currently implemented and actively used. And, we're seeing, more and more evolve every day. So I think one of the key challenges for service providers as they implement 5G has been, 5G cannot be implemented by service providers alone. It's a real diverse ecosystem that's needed. I think, for example, we've actually, if you look at private networks, we have seen equipment vendors sort of lead the way with 5G private networking. Companies like Ericsson and Nokia, because there's a lot of consulting, there's a lot of professional services needed. And so the service provider is just one of many, IT vendors that's involved in, say, private networks. So the key, I think, for service providers is not to get lost in that whole ecosystem, not to be the secondary player, but I think they have a lot of work to do to be the primary player in specific industries. The other key trend, I think, is how do you establish sort of those vendor partnerships, and how do you establish a vendor agnostic partners? So you don't want to be wed to one specific partner. You don't want to be wed to, say, for example, one specific cloud, as in the case of Amazon. And the challenge I see there is because if you look at the Amazon Wavelength service, the customers are primarily Amazon customers. And then the service provider is sort of a secondary customer for that customer. So the key, I think, for success for service providers, they have to be the primary face to the customer. They have to develop their own platform and then market that directly rather than through a systems integrator or a public cloud provider. So establishing those partnerships, but being the primary, will be key, I think, for telcos. And then finally, since they're still in the midst of implementing cloud native platforms and transforming to the cloud, establishing a broad array of vendor agnostic a cloud platform that is also automated and secure. And I think that will allow them a wide range of opportunities to sell with various partners, but also to leverage various clouds in various regions of the world, depending on who has the best opportunities from an IT infrastructure perspective. So I'll close by saying that, we see tremendous opportunity for 5G over the next, 2 to 5 years. It's still in early stages, and, the industry is still developing specific use cases that will emerge according to various verticals and industries industries, especially on the enterprise side. The consumer side, I think the use cases are going to be more horizontal and going to serve broad array of customers. So I think the challenge will be telcos have to continue working to develop their own solutions, market directly to their customers while establishing partnerships with IT vendors as needed. So I hope that you found this session informative, and there will be some additional information if you have further questions for IDC. or myself or any of the other analysts at here. And I hope you found this insightful. And thank you for having me at this event.